I still remember the day the bank called me. "Mr. Raymond, your $200,000 loan payment is overdue." My heart nearly stopped. I don't even borrow money for groceries. How could I owe that much? I thought it was a mistake, until I saw the documents. My name, my signature, my address, but not my handwriting. Someone had forged my identity. When I called my son, I expected confusion, maybe shock. Instead, I heard silence, then a whisper. "Dad, please don't freak out." My blood ran cold. He confessed he'd taken the loan to help build his wife's dream business, a luxury fashion boutique. He said he promised he'd pay it back. Soon. Soon turned into months. Then the letters started coming. Debt collectors, legal notices, threats, and my own son stopped answering my calls. That night, staring at the papers, my shaking hands formed a silent promise. He may have stolen my name, but I'll reclaim my dignity, and when I'm done, he'll wish he never called me Dad. I wasn't born with much, just a strong back, a stubborn heart, and a promise I made to my dying wife. I'll raise our boy right. After she passed, it was just me and Ethan. He was only 7, too young to understand death, too young to lose a mother. I remember sitting by his bed at night, pretending I wasn't crying as I tucked him in. He'd whisper, "Dad, are you okay?" And I'd force a smile. "Of course, son. I'm strong for you." Life wasn't kind, but I worked hard to keep our world from falling apart. I took every overtime shift the factory offered. I came home covered in grease and exhaustion, but the sight of Ethan's drawings on the fridge always made me forget the pain. He used to say, "Someday I'll buy you a big house, Dad." I'd laugh and tell him, "I don't need a big house, just you." Our home was small but full of laughter. I learned to cook, to mend his clothes, to patch up scraped knees and broken dreams. On weekends, we'd share one pizza and watch old movies, pretending the world outside didn't exist. When he got into college, I nearly cried from pride. I sold my old truck and pawned my wedding ring to help pay his tuition. He never knew that part. I didn't want him to. Fathers don't brag about sacrifices. They just make them. Even when my body ached from years of labor, I never let him see weakness. I saved every penny, skipped doctor visits, and ignored back pain so I could send him a few extra dollars each month. When he graduated, I thought it was all worth it, seeing him in that cap and gown, smiling, strong, confident. It felt like I'd finally done something right in this cruel world. Then he met Claire. She was beautiful, sharp, ambitious, the kind of woman who could light up a room and dim your spirit at the same time. I'll admit, at first I was happy. Ethan deserved love. When he brought her home for dinner, she complimented my cooking, but her eyes scanned my old furniture like it offended her. I could sense she came from a different world, one of gloss, not grit. But I ignored it. Love, I told myself, could bridge any distance. After their wedding, they stopped visiting as often. I'd wait by the window some Sundays, pretending I wasn't waiting. Sometimes I'd call, but Claire would answer saying, "Ethan's busy, maybe next week." Next week turned into next month. Then silence. I kept sending birthday gifts, handwritten cards, little bits of money for emergencies. Never realized the emergencies were their shopping trips and designer vacations. Still, I didn't complain. I believed family meant giving, not keeping score. Every parent wants to see their child soar, even if it means standing alone in the shadow. But as I'd soon learn, the same love that lifts your heart can also crush it. And the son I once raised to be my pride was about to become my deepest wound. The first blow came in an envelope. Dull, official, cruel. Notice of default. The bank's logo stared up at me like an accusation. My hands trembled as I unfolded the paper and read the number. $200,000. For a heartbeat, I thought it was a prank. Then I saw my name, my address, my forged signature. My stomach dropped out of me. The room tilted. I could taste metal. I called Ethan before my heart could convince my head to be reasonable. "Ethan, what is this?" My voice was smaller than I expected. There was a long pause on the line, paper rustling, a guilty silence that screamed, "Dad." "I can explain," he began, and his voice sounded thin, distant. "Explain? My name is on a loan for $200,000 and you think—" He cut me off. "Please don't make a scene. Claire needs the cash for the boutique. It's an investment." "An investment?" I echoed, as if the word could become a bridge back to sense. I drove to their apartment with the envelope clenched like evidence of a crime. My heart hammered like I'd run a race. Claire opened the door in perfectly manicured nails and a silk robe, the smell of expensive perfume trailing behind her. "Oh, Raymond," she said, as though that explained everything. "You're making a fuss. You put my name on a loan." I shoved the paper forward, and my finger shook. "You forged me," she sighed, dramatic and patient. "You're overreacting." Ethan wanted to help the business get started. "We'll pay it back." Ethan stood beside her, eyes hollow. "Dad, you'll pay it back." I could hear the lie in his voice like a crack. "How? By selling the boutique's fake handbags? By living off favors?" Claire's laugh was soft and cruel. "You really don't understand how things work, do you?" Humiliation flooded me. The neighbors peered from behind curtains as my son and his wife treated me like a nuisance on their doorstep. Days later, the collectors started calling. Cold-voiced men reciting deadlines, interest, consequences. I sat at my kitchen table under a single light. The notice spread like a map of my ruin. Shock lodged in my chest first. A numbness that made my hands feel unreal. Then disbelief. How could the boy I taught to tie shoelaces sign my name without blinking? Sadness followed, not just for the money, but for the betrayal of trust that felt worse than any debt. I replayed memories, his scraped knees, the science fair trophy, the night I held him while he cried for his mother. Each memory became a nail hammered into my heart. Anger crept up like a wildfire. It started slow, warming my blood, then roaring through me. I went back to their boutique the day it opened its second location, a glittering storefront, while I rationed rice at home. I watched through the window as Claire posed with customers, her laugh the same one that had cut me. "Dad, sit down. Let us handle this," Ethan said once when I confronted him by the curb, as if I were a child throwing a tantrum. "Handle this? You stole my name, my house, my peace." My voice broke. He looked away. For a moment, I saw the boy who once needed me, now a stranger who feared my disappointment more than he feared the law. Friends I'd known for decades began to avoid me. Whispers followed me down the street. "Did you hear about Raymond's son?" They'd murmur, pity thin and awkward. I had to sell my watch, the one my wife had given me, to pay the first round of collector threats. It felt like selling my history. Every signed document, every polite dismissal from banks, every legal form I filled felt like salt in an open wound, humiliated and exposed. I swallowed the bile of shame while my son lived in a world of lunches and photo shoots. When I asked him why, he said, "I thought you'd understand." Understand? I had understood sleepless nights, empty stomachs, every sacrifice. I had thought he understood loyalty. That's when my sorrow turned hard and bright into something that would not be ignored, felt betrayed not only by their greed but by the ease with which they discarded my years of love and labor. And, as the months of letters piled up, along with the missed calls from banks and the neighbors' sideways glances, I realized this hurt was not the end. It was the spark. The rain poured harder than usual the day I broke. I was standing across from their boutique, my coat soaked, my shoes heavy with mud. Inside, warm lights made glass sparkle like a different world. Their world. I watched Claire laugh, the one that had become a razor in my chest. Ethan stood beside her, arms slung around her waist, his face bright with pride. For a moment, I simply watched, letting the image burn into me. My hands clenched until my nails dug into my palms. The pain was real. Grounding. I tasted metal and old pennies. The taste of every time I'd given until I had nothing left. Memories rolled through me like a rough tide. His first steps, the late nights sewing costumes for school plays, the tuition I scraped together. I saw the truck I sold, that wedding ring I pawned, the watch I traded in for groceries when collectors came calling. Grief came first. A cold, heavy blanket that settled over my shoulders. I could feel my chest tighten, like a fist pressing down on my ribs. Then disbelief. How could the son I raised become the man who would sign my name for his convenience? The disbelief cracked into anger, low and slow at first, then rising like a storm. I remembered the first letter from the bank, the bureaucratic cruelty of printed figures, interest rates, final notices. I remembered knocking on their door and seeing Claire's eyes slide past me like I was invisible. Something snapped in me as clearly as a branch breaking. Not the wild, blind snap of hatred, but a quiet, deliberate break, a reordering. I felt the weight of years tilt inside me and settle into a steadier shape. Resolve. My grief became fuel. My humiliation hardened into purpose. I thought of all the little things I had swallowed, the missed Sunday dinners, the excuses, the half-truths. Enough, I told myself. Enough of being small so they could be grand. I pictured every debt collector's call, every pitying look, every sleepless night. And I turned them into a ledger I would balance. I was tired of being the victim in a story they wrote about themselves. Tired of pretending their choices were accidents and not deliberate betrayals. I breathed in, counting slowly, feeling the air fill the parts of me that had been hollowed out. There was clarity in that breath, a map forming where there had only been fog. I promised myself I would be patient, I would be smart, I would be relentless, but not reckless. No shouting, no desperate pleas. Only proof, and then the truth laid bare. I would not let rage make me cruel. I would let it make me just standing there, rain washing the cold off my face. I felt something settle into place. This was no longer about money alone. It was about dignity, about teaching the boy I raised a lesson he could not ignore. I pressed my palm to the boutique window as if trying to touch the life they'd built from my ruins. My reflection stared back. Older, wearier, but steadier than the man who had waited on a stoop for scraps. I drew a breath so deep it hurt and whispered to myself, "Enough is enough." And then, quieter and harder than anything before, I vowed, "I will take back what you stole, and you will remember who I was." I didn't storm forward. I sat down and learned to wait. Patience became my weapon the day I decided to fight. First, I cataloged everything. Every letter, every call, every transaction that smelled like someone else's greed. I made plastic folders, neat and labeled. Loan, signatures, receipts, witnesses. Then I called an old friend from the factory who'd become a lawyer. Quiet, reliable, the kind of man who keeps his word. We spoke in low tones over coffee, like conspirators, and he taught me the language of evidence. I learned to read. A bank statement with the same care I once used to mend a torn shirt. Next came subtle surveillance. Not the flashy kind, but small things. Photos from outside the boutique. Copies of receipts slipped from trash. Screenshots of social posts that hinted at cash flows I didn't have. I practiced asking questions. That sounded casual. "How's the shop doing?" While my camera recorded faces and laughter and prices. I visited the bank twice, playing the confused old man. They handed me forms, and I smiled and took notes. Underneath that gentle smile, I was mapping their mistakes. I reconnected with neighbors, with the barista who remembered deliveries, with a retired teller who knew how forgeries sometimes slipped through. I made friends in quiet places. The pawnshop owner who remembered when I'd sold my ring, the courier who'd delivered packages to Claire & Co. with no returns. Each small ally became a thread in the web I was weaving. I taught myself about little tech, how to preserve emails, how to timestamp photos, how to back up files so nothing could disappear. When I called Ethan, I recorded the conversation, not out of spite, but to preserve truth. I never let them see me sweat. I smiled at family events and left before anyone could suspect I was building a case. I even opened a simple email account under a new name and sent questions to suppliers, watching who answered and who lied. My lawyer helped me draft a quiet demand letter that tasted faintly of consequence. It would come later, after more proof. I waited for them to slip, and they did, in petty ways that only someone paying attention would notice. A duplicate receipt, a delivery that didn't match an invoice, a signature that trembled under scrutiny. I documented the boutique's sponsors, the influencer posts, the dates when money clearly flowed in while my letters flowed out. Sometimes I acted foolishly on purpose, letting Claire overhear a conversation about old money and what elderly people won't notice. She took the bait, thinking me harmless. She didn't know the hook was already set. I kept records in triplicate, paper, digital, and with a trusted friend tucked away in a safety deposit box. There were nights I sat at my kitchen table, until dawn, piecing together timelines like a detective in a cheap novel. People thought I was lost in grief. In reality, I was assembling a ledger of truth. I reached out quietly to a local journalist I once helped when his car broke down. He owed me a favor and liked stories where the underdog won. But I didn't hand the story to him. Not yet. I let him simmer, kept him interested with small teasers. Everything had to line up perfectly. Criminal evidence, bank confirmations, witness statements, and public interest. I wanted a revelation so clean it cut through their noise and left no room for excuses. There is power in the slow reveal, in watching them grow cocky and then, one by one, watching their pillars fall. So I continued to play the doting father while my plan collected in silence, and every night, folding my lists into my pocket, like a prayer, I smiled to myself and thought, they don't know the shape of my patience. Soon, all these quiet pieces would snap into place. But not yet. Let them keep celebrating. Let them keep spending. I was patient, and patience is devastating when it finally moves. The morning everything began, I walked into the bank with the calm of a man who had nothing left to lose and everything to prove. My lawyer and I handed over the folders, the receipts, the timestamps, the recordings, the photos from behind the boutique window. The teller's face changed when she saw the signature comparisons. The forgery wasn't subtle. That first paper cut through their confidence like a blade. I didn't stop there. I sent a carefully edited packet, not loud, just the right pieces, to the Financial Crimes Unit. They opened an inquiry. I watched them begin to stitch the loose ends into a pattern. Next, I fed small, verifiable tips to the local journalist I'd primed. Nothing accusatory, only questions that made the reporter ask harder ones. Claire's first mistake was arrogance. She posted a receipt from a private supplier and tagged the influencer who'd gifted stock for promotion. That influencer panicked when the journalist called. She hadn't been paid as promised. She'd been used to launder attention for cash. The thread unraveled faster than I expected. Then a twist. Claire tried to move the money through a shell account she thought was anonymous. But my lawyer had already subpoenaed the bank records. The trail glowed bright under legal scrutiny. Ethan, sensing the noose, tried to cut a deal. He begged the lawyer to keep things quiet, offered to sign a promissory note, promised to liquidate assets. I recorded the call. He sounded small, frantic, like the boy who once hid from thunderstorms. When the police finally arrived at the boutique, Claire attempted to stage a scene, fake fainting, a flurry of calls to friendly faces. That backfired. The journalist had arrived before the PR team and streamed the raid live. The boutique lights went from glam to glaring reality as officers walked through racks of unpaid-for goods and boxes labeled with supplier names that matched my evidence. Claire's smile collapsed on camera. Her carefully curated life flickered into a dozen text messages and invoices. Ethan was led outside in cuffs. He looked at me with pleading that broke my chest. "Dad, please," he whispered. I kept my face still. I had learned to let truth do the punishment. Another surprise unfolded when one of their supposed big spenders confessed under pressure. She'd been a fake client all along, a shell used to create fake sales and inflate revenue. Sponsors who'd once sent gifts demanded refunds. Influencers scrubbed posts. The boutique's insurance wouldn't cover fraud. The bank froze their accounts. The landlord padlocked the doors. Creditors lined up like vultures. Then came the civil hearings. Their defense cracked under the weight of the files I'd kept. The timestamps, the recorded calls, the pawn shop receipts showing my sold watch in their possession. Claire tried to pin everything on a rogue employee. Ethan tried to claim ignorance. The judge didn't buy it. When restitution hearings began, the court ordered the boutique's assets liquidated to pay down the forged loan. The shop's chandelier, the racks, the display cases, pieces of a life built on my name, were auctioned. One by one, they were sold to pay what had been stolen. Watching the chandelier go felt both terrible and cleansing. Ethan pleaded for mercy at the sentencing hearing, spoke of pressure, of wanting to impress. His voice cracked like wet wood. I listened, and a piece of me ached for the boy behind the man. But mercy without accountability would teach nothing. The judge sentenced him to community service, mandated financial restitution, and a probationary period with strict oversight. Consequences that would follow him every day. Claire received fines, a ban from holding a director's position, and the boutique's records were handed to investigators for criminal charges. The final twist, and my small, private victory, came when a bank officer, ashamed, testified that they'd missed red flags. His testimony sparked an internal review and a policy change that protected other elderly customers. In the end, it wasn't just punishment, it was exposure, accountability, and a small correction to a system that had enabled them. Ethan begged me afterward, "Dad, help me." I could have used my voice to soften his sentence, but I chose a harder kindness. I told him I would help him rebuild if he faced his debts, did the work, and never hid behind my name again. He accepted, humbled. It wasn't forgiveness in a single gesture. It was a long path back. As for Claire, She tried to vanish into another city. But her reputation was gone. Doors closed where she expected them to open. Sitting in the courtroom, that day, I felt justice slice clean and merciless, not because I wanted to see them suffer, but because truth demanded consequence. When it was over, I stepped outside into the cold and felt strangely light. The ledger of pain had been balanced, and for the first time since the notice arrived, I could breathe. After the court hearings ended, I went home to a silence that felt strange. Not heavy, but clean. For the first time in years, there were no threatening letters, no phone calls from debt collectors, no lawyers asking for signatures, just the ticking of my old clock and the hum of peace. I stood in my small kitchen, staring at the sunlight through the cracked window, and realized I wasn't ruined anymore. I was free. The bank had cleared my name. The fraudulent loan was erased. The judge even ordered a formal apology letter from the financial institution. A single page that meant the world to me. I pinned it to the wall above my desk, not as a trophy, but as proof that quiet perseverance still meant something in this noisy world. Ethan called me a few weeks later. His voice was softer now, humbled. He said he'd started working as an assistant at a construction firm. Long hours, small pay, but honest. I could hear the sincerity, the broken pride slowly stitching itself back together. "I'm sorry, Dad," he said. "I didn't understand what I was doing to you until I lost everything." I wanted to yell, to remind him how close he came to destroying me. But instead, I took a long breath. "Son," I said, "you didn't just take my money. You took my peace. But maybe now you'll learn how hard peace is to earn." He cried quietly, and I let him. Sometimes silence says what forgiveness can't. Claire never called. I heard through neighbors she'd left town, chasing a new life under a new name. It didn't matter anymore. My revenge wasn't about her downfall. It was about reclaiming what she thought I'd lost forever. My dignity. I began rebuilding slowly. The house was old but steady. I fixed the broken window panes, repainted the walls, and planted marigolds in the front yard. My wife's favorite flowers. Each bloom felt like a small victory. A piece of color returned to a life once drained gray by betrayal. Neighbors began greeting me again. Their pity turned into respect. They'd seen how the old man they wrote off as a victim had turned the tide without a single shout. Some nights, I still sat by the window, thinking of the past. I'd trace my fingers along the edges of that apology letter and whisper to my late wife. I kept my promise. I raised him right, even if the lesson came late. And maybe that was enough. Ethan started visiting again after a few months. He came quietly. No grand gestures, just coffee, conversation, and genuine remorse. The first time he hugged me, he whispered, "Thank you for not giving up on me." I said nothing, just patted his shoulder. Sometimes love doesn't need words, only boundaries and truth. Peace didn't come all at once. It came in moments. Morning walks, soft laughter with old friends, the taste of tea without bitterness. I had learned that revenge, when done right, isn't destruction. It's restoration. It's taking back what was stolen, not just the money, but the self-worth they tried to erase. As I sit here now, writing this story, I realize the real victory wasn't their punishment. It was finding myself again. The man who once believed in honesty, who almost lost it to despair, and who learned that quiet justice can roar louder than rage. Morale. Sometimes, the cruelest betrayal comes from the people you love most, but so does the chance to rediscover your strength. Revenge doesn't always mean ruining others. Sometimes it means rebuilding yourself so completely that they can never break you again. Because in the end, truth doesn't shout. It waits. And when it finally speaks, even the guilty have no choice but to listen.